Welcome back to Let's Play Starmourn. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about Fury. As in the other videos, we're going to start with an overview of the skills that the class has. We're going to move on to the stats, the stat distribution that you want for your Fury, and we're going to be talking about hunting rotations and lesson investments, what you should learn in what order, and then we'll be talking a brief summary of what the class looks like in PvP. That's all. We'll see you in a sec. So, Furies are the masters of Star Kith, and they wield a Kith blade, which I imagine like a giant sword that you slice people with. And the core concept of Fury is these two skills, Battle Flow and Rage, and they work in synergy with one another. So when you're fighting, you use combos, generally speaking. You'll hit them with a Battle Flow attack. You'll be in a certain stance. You start off in the symmetry stance, and then depending on what Battle Flow attack you use, it's going to send you to a different stance. So this is, for instance, Gut Rend will send you to Flare, and then when you're in Flare, you can use a Rage attack. So you hit them with your blade, it sends you to the Flare stance, and then in the same combo, you use your Flare Rage attack, so maybe Rage, and we see in Flare, you might be the first thing we'll be going for here is Flying Lash. So we can do, for instance, in this theoretical example, we'll do Gut Rend, combo Gut Rend, Flying Lash, and indeed that's what we'll be doing. That's sort of the core concept. Once we land in Flare, we're going to want a ability here that takes us from Flare, perhaps Sear, and we're going to go Sear, and then Sear is going to send us back to Symmetry. So we'll do Sear and then something like Strike, which can be used from Symmetry. And basically we cycle through these stances using our Battle Flow and Rage. I'll get more specific about what combos and what rotations we'll be using at one time. This might seem a little complicated at first, and indeed there is sort of a notion that Fury is not for the faint of heart, but I think that's kind of true with all classes. There's always some complexity that you need to overcome with most classes, and once you sort of get it, then it's really quite a simple class. It's very solid. It's probably the best class in hunting, just in terms of its raw damage output and survivability and all that. And it's easily the best class in PvP, especially in solo PvP, but also in group PvP at the moment. It just has such high raw damage, such great utility, all sorts of tools to keep on your target, unrelenting. Fighting a Fury is a pain. But more on PvP later. We're going to talk about our stats. Stats show. Well, first up, like all classes, we're going to start with 50 in life force, then we're going to max regen, and our main damage stat is going to be strength. We're going to use strength to increase the damage of our Battle Flow and Rage attacks. In terms of hunting rotations, just give me a quick sec. What we're going to want to do is we start with Gut Rend. Maybe Gut Rend, and I mentioned that we want use Gut Rend, and that's going to send us to Flare. From Flare, what we're going to eventually want is to use Wound, which maybe Wound. We're going to want Wound, send us to Eruption, and in Eruption, we're eventually going to want Rupture, And this is higher, but not too many lessons, and we're going to want Rupture in order to send us up to Eruption. So if you have Nexus Basher, you don't super have to worry about making sure you're in the right stance all the time and figuring out all these things. You can use Nexus Basher and it'll figure this stuff out for you, and that's really nice. So nevertheless, we do want to learn about this order. We want to learn Seer, and then we want to learn Flying Lash, and then we want to learn Rupture. And that's going to give us a solid hunting rotation to work with. After that, we're going to want to take a brief foray into fulmination, and we're going to want this Windshape Blade. What Windshape does, and indeed there's some other shapes, if you do A-B fulmination, there are different shapes that your blade can take, and it modifies your attacks in different ways. If you're on Windshape, it's just going to increase the amount of damage you do, and it's very strong. So after you get Windshape, you might want Slice, and Slice is going to be when you are unstoppable, and this is your first skill in Unstoppable. What Unstoppable is when you consume Rage, and Rage is generated by battle flow attacks and then consumed by Rage attacks. You never generally have to worry about not having enough Rage. Instead, what you want to do is consume as much Rage as you can. Once you have consumed enough Rage, you will be able to go on Unstoppable, and then you'll replace whatever Rage attack you had at the time with Unstoppable. You'll enter the Unstoppable condition, I guess. It's not really a stance. You can replace all of your Rage attacks with Slice, and Slice does a hell of a lot of damage. Now, I suggest this. You may also, this next in the lesson order, you may also want to do Fever. Fever is the interrupt ability for Fury. I would rather recommend that you stick to hunting areas that don't involve any interrupts and just go straight for Slice and ignore those interrupt areas for now. And you can do that for quite a long time until you can actually entirely avoid interrupts until you're level 50. So that's what I would do personally, but it's up to you. After you learn, well, you should eventually get Fever though, and when you do get Fever, you might want to take a quick second to learn Fire Wreath. This is about 90 extra lessons, and 10% of the damage that is dealt to you gets dealt back in retaliation, and this is just a nice little extra trickle damage that can help you kill mobs quicker, and people. So after Fire Wreath, one thing you might want here is Berserk. Berserk happens when you're in Flare, which is part of our main hunting rotation, and it's going to increase our Kith Blade damage by 20%, which is pretty significant. Additionally, it consumes extra Rage, which means we can get Unstoppable faster. Now, if you have Nexus Basher, Berserk only fires when you've killed a mob with your Blade attack. So if you kill your mob with a Blade attack, that means your Rage attack is generally going to be unused because there's no target for your Rage attack, and you can't retarget with your Rage attack to your next target. So with Berserk, you're able to change what Rage attack you're about to use to Berserk, and then it's just a buff that you apply to yourself, and it's not targeted, so it will work. That's how the Nexus Basher uses Berserk. Some people also prefer to have Berserk while they're actively attacking one mob. Next up, you're probably going to want Deep Strike. And this is going to allow you to actually use Eruption with a Rage attack. Before you have Deep Strike, you'll just be sending sending Rupture. Just be hitting Blade Rupture with no combo. And the reason this is because it's still quite strong to use Rupture even if you don't have a rage attack, but you're going to want to add a rage attack to your Eruption ability quickly, as fast as you can, but it's still more optimal than the previous rotation to have this. Once you get Deep Strike, your hunting rotation is pretty much complete. You'll be slicing in Unstoppable. You'll be switching between you'll be switching between Eruption and Flare, and just rotating back and forth between them. You're not even ever going to enter Symmetry when you're in sort of the throes of combat. And just the last optimization you can make, maybe Rage Overpower. This is the trans ability in Rage, and this is similar to Berserk in the way that if you kill a mob, you can immediately use that missed rage attack to use Berserk. You can do this with an even better ability, and indeed you can have both Berserk and Overpower active at the same time, and this gives you an extra 30% more damage. And with both Berserk and Overpower on, you do a hell of a lot of damage. Doesn't always line up, but this is sort of the final optimization that you can make with your Fury. That's about it for your lesson investments. Let's talk about PvP. So PvP is all about Rend. Rend is the final ability in Battle Flow, and the condition for it is a little bit complicated, but basically you'll need to hit their muscular and internal systems, and you'll need to apply a lot of afflictions to each one. So Fury is sort of a heavy damage as well as heavy affliction class. You'll be delivering a lot of afflictions with an ability called Overwhelm, which you use during Unstoppable. Basically, it chooses from a random group of afflictions and applies them all, and they're all quite strong afflictions. And as well, you'll be damaging their arms and legs, and that's going to be slowing them down and reducing the amount of damage they do. And in addition, you're going to be doing quite a lot of damage yourself. I'm not going to talk about the specific rotations for muscular and internal damage at the moment because it's a bit involved and I don't want to get into it right now. I'll talk about it in a Fury PvP video. But safe to say, if you're up against a Fury, oh man, you have some work to do to prevent the Fury from immediately getting ahead. Simply because Fury is really fast. The subsystem damage is very fast, not quite as fast as an engineer, but it's also coupled with damage. All a Fury has to do is decide, instead of Overwhelm, they're going to use Slice, and Slice is going to deal so much damage to you, and especially if you are fully RD'd up and stuff, then you're going to be taking a lot of damage or dealing a lot of damage as the Fury. Yeah, it's just a super strong class in PvP. Has been probably the top class in PvP for a long time. That said, it does have its weakness in that it is very inflexible. So you only have access to abilities from the stance you're in, and if you are planning to use an ability which is outside of the current stances you're in, you need to sort of adjust your rotation in order to get to that ability. So it's not like they don't have weaknesses. Their weakness is their inflexibility, and but their strength is their simple unrelentingness when you're fighting a Fury. They also tank a lot of damage with Rage Resistant. So they have a good tank on them, and it's hard to straight up kill a Fury with damage. Anyway, where Fury also excels is in group combat, and that's because of this ability, Quicksand. Quicksand basically traps targets in a room once it lands, and this is the only such ability in the entire game that keeps a target trapped in one room. Now, there are some ways around it. For instance, if you are smashed out of the room by a beast or otherwise removed from the room forcibly, then your target can escape the quicksand ends. But aside from a few effects, quicksand is usually fatal. And often group combat where there's Furies on both sides is about who can land the first quicksand, because it is just that strong. Another thing that you have is Outburst. Kith Outburst, and this is going to cause everybody in the room to fly to a random adjacent location. And both these abilities, Quicksand and Outburst, need to be channeled at first. So you start them, and in order for them to land, nobody has to interrupt you. So basically, you can interrupt a Fury going Outburst, you can interrupt a Fury going Quicksand, but if they land, then they'll take effect. And Outburst can really disorganize combat groups who aren't quite as organized. They won't be able to regroup. Outburst also might save one of your teammates if they do get quicksanded and you don't have Beast with you to smash, for instance. Now, of course, there are abilities that prevent force movement in the room, which we'll talk about in a later video, but that's sort of the main idea of Fury in a group combat situation. Other than that, they're just dishing out so much damage that can be hard to survive against. So that's PvP Fury in a nutshell. And we're going to move on to the next video. We will be talking about the counterpart to the Fury, the Nanosphere. We'll see you then. Take care, Sector.